Go for it,
Wild
Dave.
kitchen.
Take the reins.
So welcome back, everyone. Just gonna give it another minute here as people are coming back. And can everyone see the slide? Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna get going. So yeah, we are very excited to reveal the 2020 value of Vermont local food consumption. This is something that we have been tracking since 2010, so it's really great now to have spanning 10 years of collecting this data and seeing how local food purchasing has changed over time in the decade that Farm to Plate has existed. And I just want to say that this is still preliminary. Working through these spreadsheets and sort of our methodology and tracking for double counting and various issues like that can be complicated. And I still haven't gotten to the point where I feel like I'm 100% confident in being exact with the figure, but nonetheless, I think it's the order of magnitude is in the right range, and so yeah, just giving you all the ability to see that now, and of course there might be some final revisions after the gathering. And a really big thank you to both David Connor, but also Annie Harlow. Annie, so David does a lot of the work around calculating the final figure and doing the double counting. And then Annie collected a tremendous amount of data this year from retailers, from producers, food manufacturers, distributors. She has built up quite a network through her retail grocers work, and also just in her past lives. And really just, yeah, did a tremendous job this year of getting a lot of data. And yeah, we hope to talk a little more in depth about some of that in a final report that will come out again after the gathering. There's a lot of other things to be said about what the data is showing that I might not get to in the presentation here today. So, let me just, okay. So just to kind of start here first with where did we leave off? So we have, prior to 2020, we've had data collection happen 3 times: 2010, 2014, and 2017. In 2010, we collected data that revealed about 2.5% of total food purchases in Vermont were of local food. And then we extrapolated based on the data that we received that probably there was another 2.5% of purchasing that we missed just in our initial phase of collection and the methodology we were using. In 2014, that number went up to 9.8% of total total food purchases in Vermont were purchases of Vermont food. And that was about, as you can see there, almost $192 million in total. And then in 2017, that figure went up to 13.9% and 310 million. And I will say that some of these increases are due to just improvements in the data that we're receiving and our overall methodology. And then, but of course, also it is very much real growth that is happening that we've seen over this decade of, it's reflective of all the work that's happening in the state to promote local food, to support local farms and food businesses. And so I think it's great to see these increases really represent, I think, the efforts of everyone in the food system and the wonderful products and food that's being produced here, and the support we have in our local food system. So 5% to 13.9% from 2010 to 2017. That's where we left off last. So what was the value of local purchases in 2020 is obviously the question we're here to answer. I don't know if you can actually hear the drum roll. And there it is. So it's we're estimating $407.5 million of food purchases in Vermont are purchases of local food. And that is 17.6% of the total food purchases in Vermont. So we are continuing to push towards 25%, which is the 2030 goal. And so just that's incredible. I really think it's truly amazing to think about. 17.6% of food purchases in Vermont are of local food. So really an incredible, I think, accomplishment. And and woohoo, congrats to everyone. Like we're all a part of that. And of course a big a big thanks to the farms and food businesses that are supplying, producing, making that wonderful food. And we've got a little more ways to go to get to 25%, but we're certainly on our way. And so let's, Peter, I like, way to go, way to eat. Exactly. So let's go a little more into the weeds here and take a closer look at the data. So here it is. Here is the 2010 to 2020, and that represents a 293.5 million increase in local purchasing from 2010 to 2020. Again, some of that is due to us, improving our methods and collection, but that is also absolutely real growth and steady growth as well. I apologize for the condensed manner in which this slide shows up, but so this is the value of that local food by product category. And this time around, so we didn't, in 2010, we didn't have solid category data. It was also categorized a little differently. So we've honed that in starting in 2014. And last time around, 2017, we had a lot of uncategorized data. This time around, while the uncategorized still is a pretty significant amount, we had much better, much more granular product related data that we collected. And so kind of some of the big increases that we saw in now having better, the data being reported to us better on a category basis, is that the meat category, we saw some really significant gains there. You can see it's about 28.6 million. Eggs as well kind of jump back up. This was the first time we collected data actually for maple as a distinct category. That's at 3 million. Vegetables, we definitely saw improvements there in terms of reporting on a category basis. So that's about 14.5 million. Which is interesting because I think that's a significant percentage of the value of total vegetable production in Vermont. So a lot of that is absolutely it's staying within the state. And then dairy, a very big category. Processed food manufacturing is a big category. And then the one note here that where it's not as high as it was last time around, that's really a reflection of what we were able to get in the data that was reported back to us, is the beverage category. So we didn't get taproom sales and on-site direct to consumer beverage, which would be like direct brewery sales. So actually it's quite possible that the total is higher than what we're reporting here, because likely those beer kind of beverage sales would bump up the total number that we missed this time around. And it could be just a reflect, and in missing that could just be a reflection of COVID and yeah, just the impacts on the industry in general. So we weren't able to attain that data this time around. And I think definitely just, yeah, and seeing this, I think also thinking about, we've heard a lot about local meat during COVID, sales there increasing. And I think this just verifies some of those trends that we were hearing about through COVID of disruptions in supply chains and everyone kind of turning to local, both personal direct purchases, but also at retail. And so, yeah, so I think as well, this is now we're starting to be able to get to a point where we might be able to start doing a little more forecasting based on kind of what we're seeing when we do get better product category data back to us. So that's kind of exciting for me as we look ahead to future years as well. And then sort of this time around, we actually experienced a little bit of the opposite, where the sales by market channel were a lot more of that data was were uncategorized. And so this is, yeah, so there's a lot of uncategorized market channel sales this time around than there were last time around. But again, I think there are some trends here that I think speak to some of the things that we heard about trends during COVID. Shifting market channels for producers. Definitely, I think you can definitely see that with the higher education spend being 2.26 million, whereas the last time around it was 5.7, and we know that institutions just overall had lower food purchases, food expenditures, and so by that fact, we were expecting to see just a decrease in the local spend. But on a percent basis, I think they continue to buy at similar percentage levels as they were in 2017. But interesting enough too, I think hospitals, we saw a slight increase there on the institutional side, as we did with K through 12 schools. So definitely, farm to school efforts seeing an impact over time, which is great from 2010 to 2020. And will be interesting to look at that K through 12, as there are some more local, purchasing incentives in the school systems, and hopefully the sort of legislation that was passed this past year gets fully funded into the future, and continues to drive sales in the school system. Food stores, so grocers, co-ops continue to be the largest market channel by sales and percentage. This time, so 127.7 million is what we're estimating based on the retailers that we collected data from. And this time around too, for the first time, some of the retail data was reported as the retailer's purchase of local food, and so not expressed as their sales. So we did apply an industry standard 32% margin to convert their purchases to a sales figure. So that is kind of built into that. And so some of that increase is because of that methodological change. But I also think that we are still just scratching the surface on the number of retailers that we're collecting data from. So I think it's still, within the range of being maybe even a conservative estimate, even with the margin applied. And just let's see some other. Yeah, and again, direct to consumer continues to be a really strong foundational element of sales. And we, for the first time, and because of COVID, there was a lot of reports of distributors or farm stands purchasing from distributors to build out their product offerings. And so we captured some of that, and that's that to farmers farm stand category, and then also the charitable system and their purchasing. So we were able to collect data on that, which is, just I think exciting to kind of add those categories and see how they might evolve and change over time from in the next decade. And yeah, and I would love to love to get that uncategorized amount down and see sort of how that actually is distributed across these other market channels. And I think, I think I have so just before we do just go to any questions about this, just some quick insights that I can share and kind of looking at this while also trying to be careful, because we really appreciate those who provide this data to us, and we have to keep it anonymous. So I want to try to be able to talk about some trends without, kind of violating that trust, if you will. But I think one interesting thing is that the manner in which dairy and value-added dairy is a really important component of sales for distributors of all kinds. And so just thinking about the interrelationships between product sales of something that is sort of either high volume or high value makes it oftentimes possible to carry other types of products and sell those and move those through the distribution system. I will say that our food hubs are a big component, absolutely, of produce sales in the state. And then another thing that I think is interesting is in the retail environment, direct store delivery, so self-distributed product or product that's arriving at a retailer through freight is still a really big part of how retailers are getting local food, oftentimes sort of way more than what they're receiving local through a distributor. So I think that's interesting from the sort of local perspective, but also I think in thinking about the regional perspective is that that may work for local food sales to do direct store delivery, self-distribution to kind of the wholesale marketplace, but that also might that creates limitations for access then to markets outside of the state. So it's just, I think, still the distribution system remains to be, I think a hard, not a barrier, but somewhat of a bottleneck for our producers. Still very much reliant on kind of self-distribution, direct means of distributing their products. And of course, there's economics sort of around that why that is. And so that's just another thing that I was seeing a little more clearly in the data this time around that I think is worth discussing. So that's the quick version of everything. And we can go to questions. Okay, I see Ellen's already answered Christina's question, but I'll just say, just to kind of clarify that. So there was a local food definition change at the state level. But in this iteration, we were collecting data that was during a period of time where that definition didn't apply. So we decided to keep the definition consistent with how we've done it in the past, which is essentially Vermont plus 30. So with that change in future iterations, we might see fluctuation a little bit in the first in the next iteration because of how local is defined and how that might affect the overall sales figure that we record. And then okay, great. Yeah, Graham, I'll go to you, and then I'll scan the chat as well for questions that are unanswered.
Thanks, Jake. That was an awesome presentation. I have a few questions. I'll just rattle off and answer what you want to.
Yeah.
I was wondering, also because of this Wild Kitchen collaboration that we saw last night, is wild gathered or hunted food a part of this? Clearly, maybe not and then how is that valued? And I'll say a couple more, but same with direct sales. Like, I'm wondering how you're doing that. I saw Annie ask for support in contributing data. And as a small farmer who does do direct sales, for example, I'm wondering, oh, like, how can I contribute? Or working at Rural Vermont, how can I ensure that we can do outreach to support that? And lastly, just any indication of how much of a shift in direct local sales purchasing you saw in 2020 because of the pandemic, and how much could that have affected the numbers from the last 3 years?
Yeah. So in terms of foraged or foods that are sort of not market-based or commercially obtained, we're open to figuring out a way to add that into this estimate. Meredith Niles actually recently we had a little email exchange with her because there is some research coming out of UVM and work coming out of UVM to have a methodology to estimate the value of that food that's grown, obtained, foraged by Vermonters. So I think, I think we're talking preliminarily about how to potentially add that into the estimate. In terms of, what was the second question, Graham? That's the one that now I'm forgetting.
One was around direct sales data.
Yes.
How we can contribute data collection.
Yep. So the direct sales data in terms of the total amount is reliant. We typically fall back to the census estimate for that. So we're basing that off of the 2017 direct sales estimate from the 2017 agricultural census. However, in getting direct sales data from farms and food manufacturers, that allows us to actually report the category numbers with a little more specificity, because the census doesn't break out that estimate on a product category basis. And I think there's always this question of this sort of the having to always rely on the last census year is something that we wouldn't like to be always like tethered to. And it's just a matter though of that's the best representative sample that we can get. And so if we were just to rely on a survey of farms in between years, we might be have sort of an incomplete perspective of what those sales are on a total basis. And so figuring out how to pair reported data from individual producers that can help us understand things on the category side, or potentially how does that amend the census estimate is, there's some methodology questions around that. But so in aggregate, the census value is the one that is kind of the go-to right now. And we know that's limiting. And so I think we're continually, and I think there's a lot of conversations just beyond Annie, David, and myself about this that we could certainly have. And then the COVID trends, I think definitely just in general, definitely the shift to retail. I think that's going to be, so I'm sort of interested in this, in the next round is, do retail sales stick that increased during the pandemic of producers having to shift their markets, retail kind of being more receptive, maybe because of the supply chain disruptions. Will those increases hold? So we got a foot in the door. Is the foot still there, or do we step in fully or not? So that's one thing that showed up, and I'm looking to kind of see if that will still be there in the next iteration. And with that too, how will institutional sales rebound? I think the meat, I think definitely the meat sales is one that we saw this increase. We heard about this increase, and I know a lot of producers though are also kind of they're uncertain about that, is that growth going to still be there? as consumer habits and preferences maybe shift back, or were those shifts, things that again have a degree of permanency to them. So a lot of those things I think are, we can't answer with certainty right now, but those are open questions that I think the data kind of shows that, a lot of the things we were hearing about of COVID trends or shifts in consumer preferences and kind of category increases, it's showing up there. And now I think it's a matter of will it stay, will it stick, and and be kind of also just real growth, or is it a flash in the pan as kind of the pandemic stays with us and consumers maybe go back to certain habits, or are those habits really changed? And I'm seeing there's a lot of good comments. Any other questions? And raise your hand because it's hard actually to follow the chat for me right now, because there's a lot of good stuff getting posted in there.
Jake, do you want to maybe unshare your screen?
Oh yeah, sorry. I always forget to do that.
Lisa, did you have your question answered?
She's got to go pick up some kiddos, it sounds like. Any other comments or burning questions? Luckily we've got Annie. Yeah, Abby, go ahead.
Yeah, Jake, I was just curious, and maybe we can talk about this at another time, but any suggestions of how you want to get the word out about the new data, the new percentage, since we've been talking about it for a while and people are certainly asking about it?
Yeah. Let's get it out there through any means we can.
Abby, just so you know, Scott Waterman's already been in touch with me about including the totals number at Anson's December ag review from the secretary piece. And then I talked to Scott about having a more detailed reveal in the January issue of ag review. We just were not ready to be able to do it more quickly, but we'll have Kelly will be working on a whole outreach strategy, and we'll make sure to loop you guys in.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I'm being cautious there is that knowing that there might be some revisions here or there to what I just presented. And last year, I think we did put out a press release right after, and then it was like, oh, we amended something. And so now that figure isn't quite right. But yeah, I think there's a lot, and Abby, I think there's a lot of different angles to this that is not just about the total figure that makes for good stories and an education about what's sort of happening in the marketplace right now. And so that's maybe we need to gather a couple of partners around this to think through that not only how to distribute it, where to distribute it, but the types of messages that we could actually derive from the data we collected.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. And I think additionally, just for an FYI, the agency is going to relaunch the COVID impact survey to producers that we did, March through July of 2020, when we were in the kind of the heat of the pandemic, since we're clearly hearing from businesses that, and even from some businesses, that they're really feeling like all of a sudden now more of the impact of the pandemic on kind of worker challenges, price challenges, distribution issues, supply concerns. So it would just be an interesting pairing to be able to share this local data while at the same time we're going back out and talking about COVID impact data on the industry. So yeah, I think there's some highlights that we could focus on over the next probably 6 months, 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah, and please let me know, email me, jake@vsjf.org if you're someone who's interested in kind of going deeper into the data and thinking about sort of the messaging side of this and how it can be communicated. I'm very, I'd love to sort of have a group of people around this. I think that's what it's all about. So yeah, thanks. And yeah, Eric, I just want to acknowledge what you kind of posted in the chat as a sort of ambassador, and what you're saying there is absolutely spot on. And is actually good language that others, if you want to borrow that from Eric, go ahead. Okay, so we are, we're sort of at time for this segment, and I want to acknowledge that, oh great, Christine, yes, absolutely, awesome. So I want to acknowledge that we have a lunch panel coming up, which is really, I think it's a really wonderful panel, looking at the Dairy Voices project. And there's the name, or I'm not sharing the screen anymore, so actually you can't see what I'm